Alright, y'all, welcome back for a second season of Let's Talk Gardening. I'm excited to be starting this back up. If you guys haven't had the chance to check out the video I posted on my page on Instagram, definitely do that, because it was just me thanking you all pretty much for the support from last year and also telling you about the premiere, which you're watching now. So again, thank you guys for watching it. All of you who shared it on Facebook and definitely posted on your stories. Keep doing that type of stuff. It's just getting the word out about Let's Talk Gardening in hopes of more people joining the gardening community. So for this second season, right, I kind of, slapped myself for not going over some common terms the first time around. So this first video I want to spend kind of talking about, gardening terminology that I used quite frequently last year and didn't really go into detail about what they mean. So this year I kind of want to spend some time doing that. So this is what this first episode is going to be about. Me sitting in this chair using my bro's workstation at King Rex 510. Shout outs to him for, letting me use it. Going over some gardening terms. Yes, I have it pulled up on a second screen because I will not remember all of the terms. And I kind of don't want to leave them off again, so that when I'm doing things in the next video, you guys can follow along and understand what I'm talking about. Some of them you guys are probably more than familiar with because you see them throughout stores every year, like terms like annual, perennial, that type of thing. So when I mention those, you'll probably have some idea of it, but I found an article that really gives you a breakdown of what all those things mean and kind of defines them well in like 1 or 2 lines, or 1 or 2 sentences. So I'm going to share those with you guys. The first one they listed was annual. Of course, this means pretty much like what it sounds, a plant that has a 1 year life cycle. In a year's timing, the plant will be completely mature. You can't get anything else out of that plant. The second term they have on here is bare root. Basically what that means is like when you remove a plant out of the soil, right? You take the plant from the ground, then you preserve it until later for planting. That's pretty much what that means. And some plants you will, want to do this with just because they'll have better chances of surviving and reaching their optimal growth if you, pull it out of the ground and then put it back in the ground when the conditions are favorable. I know people do this with different plants that grow tubers. So like the elephant ear plants. A lot of people love those types of flowers. I'm not sure if they even flowers. Those types of plants. And they produce tubers so that they can go and harvest the tubers at the end of the growing season and then take those and put them back in ground. Let's see, bolting. Bolting was a term I used last season, and I didn't go into full detail about it, I don't think. So basically what bolting means is that the plant has experienced either excessive amount of heat or has experienced a cold front of some sort. And basically that means that it's premature flowers or seeds instead of a crop. So it kind of halted its growth due to the, conditions of the weather. So it wasn't favorable and it caused the plant to bolt. That's what that means. Let me scroll through. Dormancy. Okay, so they have it the period, usually winter, when a plant rests. So this is like the daylilies are a prime example. The daylilies that I take a picture of and I post them on my Instagram every year when they're like blooming, they're dormant during the winter as the conditions for them to grow and reach their maturity is not favorable. So they go dormant, right? They take a rest during a certain degree, which is usually the winter, and then you'll see them again come springtime when they're opening up and their flowers have developed. So they're dormant during the winter. Let me see here. Fertilizer. That was something that I used quite often. Fertilizer they have here is material that is used to feed plants. That's all it boils down to. Germination. Okay, so their definition of it is the beginning of a seed's growth. That's true. But, in more detail, the germination period is when basically the seed that you put in the soil is growing, obviously, and the plant is going to grow out of that seed. So the second that plant starts to come out of that seed cracks open, the plant takes on birth, It comes out of that seed. It also is receiving nutrients from the seed. So once it's completely out of the shell of the seed, you have to now feed it, right? Once it develops true leaves, because by the time it develops true leaves, it's already got all of the nutrients it could possibly get out of that seed. And so you'll have to start feeding it what the seed was once given it. So germination process is what they describe the beginning of a seed's growth, but it's much more detailed than that, because you have to have a seed that germinates in order for it to actually grow into a plant or whatever fruit you're trying to get out of it. So germination is key. You will hear that a lot, even if you're at entry level of growing things, but just keep that in mind. It's just the seed growth. Hardy. So this is one where people use when you're converting from summer to fall gardening. Most of the time you want to find cold hardy plants, and what that means is it can sustain the exposure to frost without any types of protection. So it is cold hardy. That means it can sustain very extreme cold temperatures without you putting any row covers on it or taking precautions to like protect it with blankets or some type of material. It can just be out there. It's hardy. It can sustain that. Let me see. An heirloom, they have it as an open pollinated plant variety that has remained unchanged for 50 years or more. That I didn't know. I didn't know it was a specific amount of years for something to be considered an heirloom. So I learned something there. But there you have it. And sometimes it's good to look up terms for yourself because you do forget some of it. But that I never even knew was what they used to classify an heirloom. Let me see. Invasive. Okay, so I think I described something as invasive last season. I'd have to go back through my videos to find out. But if a plant is described as being invasive, that means it's taking over much of whatever area you're looking at. So, and they literally have here a plant that is difficult to control. The first one that comes to mind for me is the bamboo plant. You can have one bamboo plant and it'll take over an entire area before you know it, because they're so invasive. They'll keep spreading. They'll keep producing seeds. It drops down and develop into a whole nother bamboo stick. And before you know it, much of that area surrounding that one bamboo plant has many others. And that is one thing that a lot of people complain about when it comes to bamboo, because they didn't intend to have so much of it after it's been planted. So that's a prime example of an invasive plant. A native plant. So that means that basically this plant originated from wherever you are, wherever area you're in. This was an original plant. No one placed it here. There was no man that placed it there. It grows naturally out of that soil. Now, they said native is a term usually used to describe plants that were found growing in a given area before man introduced non-native plants. Yeah, that was way more detailed. Non-native or exotic. So that's a term usually used to describe plants that were not found in an area before man arrived. Okay. Go with that if you want. But non-native means your butt came from elsewhere. You know. Open pollination, they have here seeds that develop and grow naturally through wind, insect activity, or soil movement. So this is a prime example of how some seeds can be shifted to a different area than you intended for it to be. Some seeds you didn't place over here, but by the end of the growing season you have new ones over there. And you didn't place any over there, but because the wind blew it, you now have seeds or plants of a certain type in that area, and you didn't intend for it. That's a prime example. And also they did mention insect activity or soil movement. So if you have a heavy rain, right, and I think I showed you all an example of this where heavy rain kind of pushed some of my zinnia seeds over to the other side of the sidewalk, and I had zinnias popping up. That was why, because on the other side of that sidewalk is a poor drainage system. And so when it rains, sometimes, you know, water runs over to the other side where I have things growing. And then it all just kind of loops back around. It's like a huge cycle of water just flowing, you know, in that little area. Well, I had just planted seeds. And so some of those seeds were shifted by the amount of rainfall we had. and it accumulated on the other side of the sidewalk. So that's how I ended up with zinnias popping up in places I didn't plant them. Another term they spent time defining was perennial. That's a plant that lives for multiple growing seasons. So daylilies are a prime example of this, or trees even. You know, they see more than just a year's time, and they come back every single year. And you're like, this is a perennial because I'm not having to replant it. It's naturally coming back on its own. Pollination. This is one I think a lot of people are most familiar with as well. Pollination typically means you need an insect or an animal to go from plant to plant, pollinating one of your plants in order for it to flower. And then seedling, of course, the seedling is a plant that has just emerged from its seed. So kind of when I was talking about during the germination process, where you have a plant come out of the seed, and then once it develops its true leaves, that's an indicator that the seed is no longer able to provide it nutrients. So the seedling is what you're looking at coming out of that seed. Self-pollinating. This is a good term that a lot of gardeners use when they're describing to you certain plants that will require insects to pollinate it or not. Tomatoes is a prime example of self-pollinating plants because they don't require for insects to land on them and pollinate, cross-pollination or anything. They just kind of do it on their own. They set their own flowers, and they set their own fruit based off of their own pollination tactics. But they have it here as a term to describe plants that do not need pollen from another plant to produce fruit. Weeds. I'm pretty sure I was complaining about weeds last year. I did do some mulching, but not heavy mulching in certain areas where I'm going to be intentional about mulching this year because the weeds were pretty prominent in certain parts of my garden. But on the part that I did use enough mulching, I didn't see this big of an issue. They have weeds classified, as most do, a plant growing where it is not wanted and where it adds no value to your plant. Let me add that on there. It doesn't add any value to your plant, but it definitely takes from the soil to produce more weeds. So that is why people always resort to mulching, some type of mulching tactic to get rid of weeds, because they will steal nutrients from what you're trying to grow. All right, and then they also went into like soil terminology. I won't go too in depth on this because this will take a lot more time than what I really want to spend in this episode. And really, you don't want to get too sciencey starting off. As long as you have a general understanding of soil composition, you should be good. This one I see them define it: silt, sand, soil, clay. You know, if you want to know those things about your soil composition, you can always send in samples of your soil and have it tested. And so, yeah, that's an option. And they'll be able to tell you what you need to do to your soil to grow whatever it is you're trying to grow. So if you are interested in knowing what percentage of your soil is silt, clay, or sand, soil testing is the way to go. But I will breeze through some of these just to kind of give you guys some terms to be familiar with when it comes to soil. So they're talking about compost, a mixture of decayed plant matter that is used as a soil conditioner, mulch, or fertilizer. Mulch, material that helps to cool the soil and or reduce erosion, evaporation, and weeds. We touched on that a little bit when we talked about weeds, but the erosion tip, that helps with that as well. And evaporation, a lot of people use mulch so that they can retain water, so they won't have to water as often, and mulch will hold some water in to keep that plant slowly watered instead of all at once or losing it, you know. So mulch is used for that matter. Let's see here. Soil, the layer of material on the Earth's crust that is composed of tiny mineral pieces, living and non-living organisms, air, and water. Now those four components are important because you do need living and non-living organisms. You do need air, so that's why you need gaps in your soil where air can get in. And you do need water, so that all of those things make up soil. And the last term that I think I will go over, nope, I'm lying, I have a few more to go over, but one that's pertaining to the soil is waterlogged. This is an issue with beginner gardeners who claim that they cannot grow anything. Waterlogged is basically when you have over saturated that area with water. So anything that you put there is just practically sitting in water. Not practically, it is. And their definition is soil that is completely saturated with water. Yeah, so if something is waterlogged, you're probably going to cause some root rot. You're probably going to cause your plant to die, because no plant loves just sitting in water. Watermelon loves water, but even at some point it's too much water. So that's what waterlogged means. And then they also have a breakdown of general gardening techniques and terminology. So direct sowing, they define it as germinating seeds at the planting site rather than growing them indoors to transplant them later. So whenever people suggest that you direct sow, it's really important that you know what you're trying to grow and when you're supposed to directly sow it. Like, when is the soil temperature favorable for that to even germinate? You don't want to put something like watermelon out in January, because it needs really warm temperatures to even break the seed. They thrive in at least 70 to 75 degree weather or degree soil. So if it's way colder than that, which right now I think we were in the teens all day and we bumped up to the 20s, it's way too cold to have warm weather crops in the ground. So to direct sow something will make your seed be dormant, right? It will not germinate. That's two terms we just went over. And you will just be prolonging how long it'll take for it to sow. And then it may also cause your plant to bolt early, which is another term we just went over. All right, and so now they listed full sun. Full sun is kind of the term you'll meet if you're reading the back of seed packages. If something is listed as needing full sun, that means it needs at least 6 hours of sunlight each day. And that's literally what they wrote down. At least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day. Hardening off. They wrote slowly exposing a plant to cooler temperatures to help it adapt to them. Also called as acclimating. Hardening off can be the reverse as well. Not cool temperatures, but hot temperatures. You don't want to take something out of a room temperature environment and put it into an environment where it's scorching hot. So hardening off can also mean the adverse for warmer weather as well. But it definitely is for cooler weather too. But you do this so that you won't send your plant in a state of shock. If you take a plant that has not been in those conditions and put it in new conditions, it won't do well. It'll probably be very sick and die on you. So that is why we spend time hardening off our plants that we start indoors, so that when we transplant them outdoors, they'll be ready and they'll survive. Let's see what this one is. A hybrid, crossbreeding of two different plants with distinct characteristics. People make hybrids all the time from plants. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can be a matter of putting two plants that are completely unlike each other, but, are close enough to where they can cross-pollinate. And then you have a mixture of both of those plants in one the next time around if you collect the seeds from either of those plants. So, and people love hybrids, because a lot of times with hybrids, the problems that you'd have out of a native plant or out of the original plant, you won't have with a hybrid or an heirloom, because people have spent time cultivating that plant to resist certain illnesses, certain bacteria, certain problems that those plants have. So hybrids are not a bad thing. They're actually a good one. I haven't grown too many hybrids, but I probably will try to transplant some of them or get some transplants of some hybrids this year. Let's see. Pest, a term used for any insect, weed, or plant pathogen, bacteria, fungus, or virus. That's pretty self-explanatory. Pesticide, a substance used to control or kill pests. Pruning, I did mention this, and I think I did describe it last year because I was pruning my tomatoes like many people do. That means the process of removing dead, deceased, or damaged leaves or branches. Sometimes it doesn't have to be dead, and it doesn't have to be damaged. Like with tomatoes, you prune because you want your plant to grow a certain way. And so a lot of people cut off what they reference to as suckers that sit in between the main line and a lateral branch. They're like little nodes of brand new branches that'll grow into a whole nother tomato plant. But because you don't want it to be so bushy, you'll snip that off, or you don't want it to spend so much time and energy into those suckers that they snip them off so that they can get more tomato plants and less branches. And so people do prune. People prune strawberries because they don't want it to keep vining out, putting all that time and energy and nutrients into vining. They want it to actually produce fruit. I prune my tomato plants. I'm going to prune my strawberry plants this year. And I'm probably going to prune some other stuff. I don't know. Raised bed. This is when you have a garden bed that is elevated off the ground. Side dressing. So this is when you take a small amount of fertilizer and you're feeding the soil around your plant as it matures. If it's already mature, you're just feeding it nutrients to make sure that it's reaching its optimal growth. Staking. I mentioned this last year. That's when you take a pole. They have here a stick, a pole, or other object to support a plant as it grows. That's pretty much it. I don't have anything to add to that. Thinning. To reduce the number of seedlings in order to allow better air circulation and light exposure. This is true. You don't want plants, branches and stuff overshadowing other branches, because then you'll have an issue of, your plant not growing. I mean, it's simple. If somebody's standing in front of you, you'll kind of be serving as their shadow rather than being able to get whatever is for you, because somebody else is standing in your way. So, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with thinning. You thinning so that there can be air circulation and light can hit that plant. Transplant, they said to remove plants from one location and replant them in another. That's basically all it is. The trellis is basically where, you build something to support climbing plants. All right, y'all. So this is the end of the very first episode of Let's Talk Gardening for season 2. Thank you guys to everybody who came on and watched. Please share this with someone. Tag some local gardeners or anyone interested in learning anything about gardening. And like I always say, if you want to be featured on it, want to give me a tour of your garden, definitely DM me and I'll get back to you. We can schedule something. But until next time, man, familiarize yourself with these terms so that when I start to talk about things in the next video, you can follow along and not be too curious about what I'm referencing to or what I mean. I just want to spend some time talking about these terms, make sure we're all entering on the same page, because again, last year I did, and I just kind of dived in, and everybody rolled with it for the most part. I did have some questions, but just so we can all know, what these things mean going into this new growing season, and we can all try to, get the plant we desire out of what we're sowing this year. I'm wishing you all well as we enter a new growing season. These seasons have been getting quite difficult. I've talked to other gardeners and they kind of expressed the same concerns, and that we're experiencing, a change in the weather a lot sooner than what we anticipate, or a lot later than what we're anticipating in certain regions. And so it's throwing the whole gardening calendar off. But hopefully this year is better. If not, it doesn't matter. We're all growing together. We're all going to get through it together. As I always say, if you want a certain topic covered, please drop it below in the comments or DM me. If you have any questions, by all means, hit me up. If I don't know the answer, I'll find somebody who does. And until next time, definitely be blessed in every day that God gives you. Your life is full of purpose. Deuces.